Okay, so we can, if we don't have any questions, we can move to the last presentation on some research of the diesel engine. So the last presentation will be given by given by Professor Dimitrios. Professor Dimitrios Dardalis is from RSET company, the University of Texas at Austin. The title of his presentation is Rotating Linear Engine Friction and Wear Reduction for Diesel Engines, Fuel Economy of the order of 10% on the 30% load. Okay, so this presentation will also be given in video. So yeah, we can play.
Thank you for attending our presentation. This is a presentation for the rotating liner reduction in fuel consumption under 10% load. This slide shows the variation of friction, piston assembly friction contribution in a diesel engine, and there is not much agreement in the literature. There is a strong inconsistency, and these large variations are due to the fact that it's almost impossible to measure the piston assembly friction isolated from the running engine, and the modeling efforts are limited by the contact models, and experimental is of course very difficult to have a running engine and extract accurate piston assembly friction. I am showing here the instantaneous frictional torque of a single-cylinder diesel engine as calculated by Mark S. in 1991, and it shows that the instantaneous frictional torque is dominated by the early compression, by late compression, early expansion, and this is almost certainly due to piston assembly. So piston assembly is, based on this at least analysis, a very substantial contribution. The RLE concept is shown here. The cylinder liner rotates at about 2 to 5 meters per second, and the combination of reciprocating and rotating motion completely alters the tribological characteristics, eliminating a metal-metal contact, and the benefits are expected to be of the order of 4% under full load and 25% at idle based on modeling. However, under testing that we did, prior testing that we did under idle, the 25% ends up being close to 40% in a running engine. The added benefits is, of course, dramatic wear reduction and the fact that we can substantially reduce the concentration of additives in the oil, which, of course, can help extend the life of after-treatment device. This is how the prototype would. This is how the engine would look like in real life for engines with existing designs or retrofits. It would be an external driving mechanism where the orange pulley is driven by the accessories, and then a 90-degree gearbox shown on the front of the engine will turn the rotation parallel to the cylinders, and then you would only drive one cylinder, which would propagate the motion all through the engine. A potential variable drive could be possible in order to reduce the liner to crankshaft ratio for the higher speed, low load. This is how our prototype looks like. We're having it's essentially a similar system. Only since only cylinder number 2 is active, we can simplify the design. And the cylinder number 1 does not have a rotating liner. It only has a gear, brass gear, which is identical size to the rotating liner flange gear. And it is the shaft is supported by 2 ball bearings in the cylinder, and we have an external mechanism that actually drives the brass gear, and then the motion is moved to cylinder number 2, which is the active one. You can of course see that the bob weights on the crankshaft are not shown, but the 5-bearing crankshaft is balanced by an additional 3 bob weights that replace the pistons, the connecting rods and pistons. The face seal mechanism is a little bit shown on the top right, where it actually contains the combustion gases. This is more details on the face seal mechanism, which has been covered in other publications. And the only thing we can say is that this actually works very well in containing combustion gases and lubricant. This is how our prototype looks like. It is connected to the blue dyno that you can see. You can see the 90-degree gearbox and the drive shaft for the rotating liner. You can also see the fuel injection pump on the middle of the picture, roughly. One of the problems of the single cylinder operation is that the benefits, the friction benefits, are diluted in by the fact that we have 5 bearings per main bearings per cylinder as opposed to 1 1/4, and we have an oversized accessories. However, any FMEP benefits can be directly calculated and counted. The experimental setup is as follows. First of all, we have a baseline engine which also has only cylinder number 2 active, and we have been able to get FMEP data from this at idle. We have a high resolution crankshaft encoder. There is no thermostat on the engine. The engine is the engine coolant is circulated and slowly warms from about 68 to about 74, which is the range that we usually take data. There is an oil heat exchanger, oil to water heat exchanger in the block, which allows a fairly good stabilization of the oil and coolant temperature, and we are able to calculate IMEP, and from that and from the BMEP we can calculate FMEP. And for this test we're focusing on 950 and 1150 RPM. We're showing 3 different dates, date A, B, and C, and in all these 3 dates our results are actually fairly consistent. Here we're showing the dates for date A, test 6 through 9. And you can see we're tabulating the BMEP and the speed, and of course the oil temperature. And you see that the FMEP is more sensitive to load than anything else. You can see here at idle, 820 RPM, we are about 1.6 bar FMEP, but at higher loads we're actually considerably less. And in this first test, we actually noticed the sensitivity of FMEP with load. So then in the next date, we actually try to focus more on this, and you can see on test 3 and 4, these are separated by about 2 minutes, and the engine was constantly operating under load, and you can see a reduction by 0.09 bar FMEP, which is pretty substantial. And then when we relax the load, you see the FMEP going up again to the preload cases, even though the coolant and oil temperature slightly increased again. And we're also showing the baseline on red. The baseline FMEP on red at 750 RPM and idle is around just under 2 bar. And then in day 3, we actually focused on higher RPM, and we, in this case between 3 and 5, the engine was operating under high load for about 2 minutes, and you see a substantial reduction of FMEP by almost 0.2 bar, which is really substantial, and this has to be due to a localized heating of the rotating cylinder and the piston. Before we analyze the localized heating more, I'd like to show you a few typical, 2 typical pressure traces for these cases. You can see here under low load, date B, test 6 shown. You see a peak pressure around 46 bar. You can see FMEP about 1.62 bar. The dyno is dragging the engine slightly, so it's not 0 BMEP, but it's pretty close to 0. And the adiabatic thermal efficiency was 48.6%, and this is consistent for all the low load cases. Here is under the highest load, 1130 RPM. You can see peak pressure is 70 bar, and you can see you can still see that most of the heat release still takes place at during the premix combustion, which this is probably an anomaly due to our mechanical fuel pump. The adiabatic thermal efficiency is 56.8% for this case, which is consistent for all the high load cases. And we think that the basic driver for this is the fact that our forged piston grows considerably between idle, in this case, reducing the end gap flow area, the piston ring end gap flow area. So now the question is, why in the RLE do we have higher sensitivity of engine load with friction? And in the regular engine, we are going to see a piston warm-up and cylinder warm-up under increasing loads, but the fact that the pressure loading on the rings is also increased dominates, and typical friction models predict about 0.1 bar friction increase between 45 bar and 70 bar peak pressure. And of course, the hydrodynamic operation of the piston rings and piston skirt means that the sensitivity to that pressure loading is pretty close to zero in the RLE. However, there may be additional reasons, one of which is the fact that at idle, the piston of the RLE gets about 300 to 350 watts less heating than the piston rings of the baseline gets, because we don't have the metallic contact, which means that the piston of the RLE is conceivably considerably cooler. So then once we start putting load on it, the difference in piston temperature is actually more pronounced. Additional reasons is the fact that we have a relatively thick oil film that increases the heat transfer resistance between the top journal and the bottom journal, and this will potentially warm up the cylinder more than the baseline, which could further reduce the hydrodynamic terms. The benefit of fuel economy is extrapolated here. This condition of 1150 RPM and 7 bar MEP resembles approximately 30% load of a modern heavy-duty engine. Even though we don't have a turbocharger, the boost pressure in most heavy-duty engines is pretty close to zero at these conditions. Assumptions for making this comparison is that we're assuming that when we extrapolate this to a full engine, about half a bar of FMEP will go away from both baseline and RLE. Additional assumption is that the baseline FMEP is identical as it was at idle at 750 RPM, and, which was namely 1.98 bars, and that's of course a conservative assumption. Assumption 3 is that the fuel consumption is proportional to the MEP. So based on these assumptions, the baseline mechanical efficiency is 78.7%, the RLE is 88.9%, and in order for the baseline to match the same BMEP as the RLE, would have to spend 0.7 bar more MEP, which would be around 10.2% more fuel consumption for the baseline, or 10.2% less for the RLE, all of which is rather conservative. So conclusion is that we have a single-cylinder RLE operating on the dynamometer. Previous tests on the previous modeling was expecting to get a 25% reduction in idle friction for the RLE. Instead, we got 40% of idle fuel economy improvement for the RLE when extrapolated to full engine. And now we're expecting to get about over 10% improvement in fuel consumption under about a third load. And this concludes a presentation at this point. Thank you for your attendance.